Hello, everyone. Welcome to Homemakers Radio. I'm honored that you chose to come here while you walk, or while you work, or while you are just being still. And I'd like to encourage you to get ready and get yourself prepared for your day or for whatever activity you're starting. And before you go, I want to show you my teacup, which is a kind of a tradition. I've shown you this before, but now I'm just recycling everything because I've been through them all. And this is a child's teacup that I bought at a thrift store many years ago. It's shaped like a rose. Very, very enchanting. And so also for my paper bag or brown paper use challenge, where I have challenged my children and grandchildren to try to find something useful or crafty or playful with brown paper. So the first thing I'm going to say is that with a brown paper bag, you can also use it for a drop cloth. If you open it up the long way and maybe fold it again and put it under the edge of the wall that you're painting, or I sometimes just paint the bottom of a door or a windowsill that just needs a touch up, and you just need a little bit of something that you don't want to get out, a great big huge drop cloth. This is just great to set under doors when you're painting and other places where you might have paint. And so these are so useful for so many things that I actually went out and bought some so that I would have them. And they let you buy some, you don't have to have groceries in them, but you have to pay for them. And so the other thing that I made from this is a list pad, which I think is really cute. And I used the chalk marker, but you can use pens or anything to decorate them with. And then I don't like to use more and more stuff. I want to see how much I can use just the paper itself. And so I tied it with some of the paper that I cut. I made a string out of it, and I can hang it up. But I can also include this in an envelope for someone. You never know, someone might think it's very useful, but it's something, isn't it? And one of the grandchildren has been making things for her doll out of these things. She made a headband for her doll out of it and decorated it beautifully. I will try to get pictures of that. And so today I'd like to talk a little bit about manners before we get started, and in the home, because homemaking is so important, and many of us have been home all this time, during the war. We were home in the beginning anyway, so some of the things that everyone else has been adjusting to, we are used to it. We're used to the isolation. We're used to the some of the work. We're used to having a list and having to think about what we're going to do next, and knowing what our purpose at home is and what we want to accomplish. We're used to all these things, but it's hard sometimes for people who have had their day outlined for them by an employer or by a school or by an institution. And so in order to function in the home and feel that you're in your right mind, you have to learn to be self-employed. You have to be motivated, and you have to have a purpose outside of trying to please another institution. And this is a challenge. And so ladies at home, they learn this quite quickly because they start looking around and seeing, they judge. If you say, what am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to do is actually looking around and seeing what there needs to be done and doing it. And this is how we were raised. This is how we raised our children. If you see something that needs to be done, you just do it. And that is one of the greatest training that you can ever have for yourself or for your children. If you see something that needs to be done, or needs to be picked up, or needs to be put away, or needs to be cleaned, you just do it within your own capabilities. So today I'm going to read to you out of Jeremiah 6:16. Everybody knows this. It's so familiar, especially to the homeschoolers. Was one of our theme verses, and the children just loved it. It says, "Stand by the roads and look and ask for the ancient paths where the good way is, and walk in it." Now, if you wanted to take some of your brown paper and make yourself a little plaque to hang up somewhere or stick on your refrigerator, you would write that verse, Jeremiah 6:16, and ponder on it and take it apart and sift it through and see what it means. ask for the ancient paths. Well, that's just talking about values. That's just talking about the good, solid teaching of the old ways. Not all of the old ways were good, but it just means go back to the ways which were good. And because it says, ask for the ancient paths where the good way is and walk in it. Yes, there were many ancient things that weren't so good, but going back to basic way of life, and in the way we believe, in the way we talk, in our manners, in some of our customs, in hospitality, in being more feminine for the women and more masculine for the men. These are the ancient paths. And also having a home and taking care of it and guiding it and guarding it. That's part of the ancient path, the ancient way. And so I want to start with manners as one of them. They are as old as the hills, and every generation has a set of manners that adapts to the type of life that they have. For example, they didn't have the industrial things back in Bible times, so their manners might have been a little different. How they treated one another and how they the protocol for certain ways, the way they shopped or the way we shop will probably be different. And so everybody has to learn how to be courteous to one another in whatever era that they're in. Now, one of the manners things that I have on my mind right now, I don't know if it would suit you, but it's something that I have been thinking about for a while, is there is a scripture somewhere in the Bible that says that decent people, Christians, ought not to be talking about some things. And it mentioned, things done in the dark and other things. And I think that it's not appropriate for women to be talking about scary things all the time, especially in a group where maybe they're just having tea, or it's like Hyacinth said, these things can be talked about in church, but not sitting around with everyone drinking tea. Like that was more sacred. But I was always tickled by that statement. But that aside, let's quit talking about disease all the time. Let's just stop it. You are maybe more isolated than I am. I am exposed a little bit more to people because I'm a preacher's wife and I'm a grandmother of 10, and I have more people around me and more things to do and that have to do with people, and I'm awfully tired of hearing about it. I'm tired of hearing about how many people have been in for the cure, and how many people and who all they know who've what kind of illness they had and how long they were sick and how they felt, and oh my goodness, it's just nauseating. And I've taken to coming to a any kind of social thing, even in the family, I'll come at the last minute to avoid all that talk. And I'm really tired of it. And even in the ladies' Bible class, I have had to ask them, please, let's just keep our mind on something that's more cheerful. I don't need to hear all the reports. Now, we do put ourselves in danger of not seeming sympathetic to people who are sick. But when you get in a position like I am, where I'm a preacher's wife and I'm a mother and I'm a grandmother, and I have more people around me talking about it. Maybe you don't. But I have noticed, too, that if I go out and I'm shopping, you cannot go down an aisle and pass somebody without hearing them talking about it. We're talking about their subject. I mean, we're talking about the subject of the media. We're talking about the subject of pharma. We're talking about their subjects all the time. It would be better if we didn't. And I think Christians have to be very careful, especially Christian women, to spread something besides gloom around. And I remember, I'll just tell you this story again. I've told it several times on here. But for those of you who are new, you might be amused by it. There was a ladies' fellowship and Bible study, 50 some years ago, and it started, but it was women whose as they got older. Now, it was my mother-in-law that taught it. I wasn't even there at the time, But as they got older, their social life was all about the doctors and the hospitals and their medication. That was their social life. They were either going to a doctor or back from a doctor or to the pharmacist and back from the pharmacist. And so when they got together for this ladies' fellowship class and Bible study, instead of it being really encouraging, these women would talk about their illness. They would talk about their surgeries. They would tell, how long they were sick and just gross stuff, how much blood was spilt and all this thing. And it was during the ladies' Bible class, and they were drinking tea and coffee. And so there was a visitor. This went on for years, and I guess they just thought it was normal. This is what they did. And then I came along, and I took a friend to the ladies' Bible class. I thought, what could be better? Great fellowship, nice ladies. They don't smoke, they don't drink, they don't swear. And they were, the first thing that happened was the teacher asked, okay, we're ready to start. Let's start a prayer list. So everybody had to tell a story about who was sick and who was in the hospital and who was going back in the hospital and who was sick and what kind of medications they were on. And there were 28 of these women, and it just went on and on and on. And this woman that was sitting next to me that I had brought, she didn't say anything about the class, but she declined to come again, and I asked her why, and she said, I don't understand how you people can stand so much bad news. She said they went on for a good 20 minutes about all the stuff that was wrong with everybody, and she said it wasn't good fellowship, and she had her little girl with her, and she was just horrified at it. And so I asked the little girl, well, how did you like it? And she said, I would come back if it wasn't going to be another organ recital. Because they were just talking about their organs all the time. But I do think, if someone wanted to start a group and that's all they did and it was for that purpose, that would be fine. And then we could choose whether or not we wanted to go and listen to it all and recite all this stuff about our organs. And I think that'd be okay if they wanted to have a class. But when they say this is a fellowship class and this is a Bible study, I'd really rather them not talk about all these things. And I don't think that to some people, it nauseates them. And when I was growing up, even at the dinner table, you were not allowed to talk about anything like that because it would put people off of their food, off of their appetite. And in those days, people were very thin, and you didn't want them not to eat. And but if they got talking about something very unpleasant at the dinner table, little children would freeze up and get scared, and they didn't want to eat. And because we were a little bit more sensitive to it, and we were not allowed to talk about, I cut my finger today and it bled. We did not say stuff like that in the presence of company or while we were eating. And I'm afraid people have forgotten this, but we still have that group, don't we? These elderly people, particularly women, whose social life consists of medical things. And now, of course, we're more exposed to it all the time on the media. And so if they're not talking about their own organs, they're talking about other people's organs. And so I wanted to just give you a little lecture about that. Let's keep our conversation clean. Just because we don't swear and just because we don't malign people and just because we're nice people, does it really mean we need to indulge and talk like that? Especially around people who are not interested or sensitive. Now, you could, if you felt you had to talk about this stuff, get together with someone who's willing to talk about it and don't expose everybody to it. And the other thing is that we don't want to come across as being unsympathetic when someone's sick or dying. But when you get a group together that is talking about this almost constantly, it ruins it for everyone else. And so, especially about their own, adventures with the medical situation. And so I don't know how to emphasize to you how we are going to have to be a light and a beacon and in this cold, dark world, and not spread gloom and doom. Now, we have to even be careful with our comments. I don't have so much problem here at Home Living and at Homemakers Radio. I don't have comments on the channel, but you can go over and leave a comment on the post where I put this. And we don't have so much problem with that. People are pretty careful not to describe in detail all the problems they are having with their organs, and that we don't have the organ recitals that little girl is talking about. So in manners, let's be thoughtful about that, especially in this day and age when there's so much media talking about it. Because if it's not edifying, there is a scripture that talks about to be careful that our conversation is edifying, and edifying means you building up and helping improve, our minds and our souls, and so that is pretty much. I could make you more miserable and talk about it longer if you would like, but it is one of the things that has plagued a lot of people, that they'll come to something that they expect will be nice, a tea party, something they're very refined, and it just disintegrates into this talk about their illnesses and their ailments and other people's illnesses. If it's not them, they'll want to talk about every member of their family and all their illnesses. But there has to be more to life than the body and the illness. There has to be more to life, and there are other things to talk about. Our goals in life, philosophy of life. Just taking something like this little scripture here that I read to you, and it says, "Stand by the road and look and ask for the ancient paths where the good way is, and walk in it." To discuss something like that and find out what it means. But of course, there are some people that are more simple-minded and will always turn something that's high and lofty like this into something more guttural and more fleshly. And so I just want to remind ladies on this dark evening to be careful, because we do have children around us, and they want to live a life. They want a future and a hope. They don't want to be thinking about death and illness all the time. We have to help them to know how to live and to be happy and to be healthy too. And I think it'd be better if we taught people how to be healthy and quit talking about all this stuff. And they were talking in one class that I went to, constantly talking about how many medications they had, and it just isn't very uplifting. But on the bright side, I'm going to read some more of this book by Brian Kozlowski about Jane Austen, and I thought that I might do something like that sometime with a book in the Bible and show you some things that you maybe had not seen. Sometimes, there's a main story and it's very dramatic, but there are little side details that we sometimes overlook that could be very edifying to us. But I have this book called The Third Reader, which is a McGuffey's Third Reader. Now, in every country in the 1800s, there were these readers, and although they don't say Christian readers, they admired the Bible, and they knew its principles were valuable to the human heart and the human soul. And so it included quite a bit of the Bible. So I'm going to read something out of this one. This is The Third Reader. It didn't mean third grade. It was The Third Reader. It's quite, it looks to me like it'd be something that a college student would be reading. So I'm going to read this to you, and it's by William H. McGuffey, 1837. But in your country, you would have one of these. I don't know who it would be by, but the schools had them. And the public schools didn't have professional type set of teachers. They hired, the parents would hire someone to come. Jeanette Oak spoke a lot about this in her books. Some of the books have been made into movies, and what was that one called? Wind Calls the Heart, and it was about a teacher that went up to a northern place in Canada and to teach because she was hired by some parents to teach some children in a mining town. And this was how it was. It was someone that was qualified to teach. And a lot of my relatives, I believe a grandfather I had was a teacher. And they didn't even have to go to a teacher's college or a college. They just had to pass a test. Just like, I don't know if you remember Little House on the Prairie, how Laura had to pass a test, and she was teaching at 16, but they had to know their spelling, and they had to know the difference between a noun and a verb, and they had to know their mathematics and various things because it was all so basic. Well, anyway, this is the third reader, and I want to read something to you out of it. It's lesson, 15, 16, 17, 18. They have Roman numerals here, and it's called The Bible. And I'm just going to read one sentence to you out of this section here, because it's so thick that you could probably ponder on it for quite a while. It's something that you could read to your children and have them write it out in their copybook and think about it. And so here it is. It's called the Bible, and here's the rule. At the beginning of every lesson, there's a rule. That's interesting, isn't it? At the beginning of every lesson, there's the rule. Like last time we talked about emphasis. And the rule was emphasis is a very important part of reading. Without it, our reading would be dull and monotonous. Now, that was the rule. And I read that to you the last time that I read a McGuffey Reader. This is called the Bible, and this is the rule. Read for improvement and not for show. I could stop right there and lecture you a long time on that because, of course, I'm a preacher's wife, and I've been in the preacher's world, and I've seen some people who thought they wanted to be preachers, but they wanted it for a status instead of just for a heartfelt calling or improvement. They wanted it for show, and that is so sad. Remember in the book I read to you, parts of it, called Up from Slavery by Booker T. Washington, he said one of the problems he had to overcome when he was teaching people who had come out of slavery how to assimilate into a world that would require a lot of them, how to work and how to dress and how to be pleasant, how to speak, that sometimes someone who didn't want to work would say they had a calling to preach. And he had to teach them that did not mean that you would be not working, because it is harder. But many of them thought that it was the easy life. So I got off on that, but it says read for improvement and not for show. This is talking about the Bible. The great object of reading is to improve your minds in useful knowledge, to establish your hearts in virtue, and to prepare you for the right performance of the duties of life. I'll just quit right there and I won't read anymore, although this is several pages long. This chapter on the Bible is several pages long. I'm going to quit there because there's enough there for you to ponder on. I'm going to read it again. Read for improvement and not for show. The great object of reading, this is about the Bible, reading the Bible. The great object of reading is to improve your minds to useful knowledge, to establish your hearts in virtue, and to prepare you for a right performance of the duties of life. And I think from the start of wanting to improve yourself, this is how you can elevate yourself in life, is to improve yourself mentally and spiritually. And it's very important, I think, in the very beginning to show yourself and your children the difference between foolish thinking and dwelling on foolish things that aren't helping your mind grow, and improving the difference between wasteful, foolish thinking and improving your minds. Remember that old advertisement way back for a university here in the U.S., and it was advertising on television, a university, and it said, because a mind is a terrible thing to waste. And wasteful thinking, it is so important to know the difference between that, and you would have to use examples like what kind of games are they playing, what kind of thoughts are they thinking, and what kind of conversation or silly rhymes are they saying over and over, or just how much of it is productive. I mean, let children be children, let them be happy, and let them play, and maybe even a little silly sometime, but don't dwell on and feed the yeast of foolishness. So now I'm going to go on to the Jane Austen diet book, which should have been the Jane Austen lifestyle book. I really wish someone would do one like this with wives and daughters, because it had plenty of activity in it to talk about. So this is called Austen Eats Garden Stuff. And so probably at the end of it, being the governor here at the manse, I'll probably give you a mandate to eat garden stuff. Okay. So I'll start here with vegetables. Fresh produce was an integral part of how the best sort of people ate in Regency England, as only the best sort of people had money and land to grow as much garden stuff as they liked. In Sense and Sensibility, when the Dashwoods leave their palatial home of Norland Park for a raggedy cottage in Devonshire, they also leave behind Norland's vegetable gardens and orchards, and thus their private supply of fresh fruit and vegetables. Oh, that sounds so sad. I think we'll stop here and tell you each to get, I told you before, get yourself a pot and some soil and just plant something. Plant one thing. But, you don't even have to go out and buy pots. You can just use, one of my sons is a gardener and big on gardening, can grow anything. And he's very enthusiastic about it. But anything he had, milk carton, empty milk carton, an empty tin can, an empty box, any kind of empty container, even the kind you drink the coffee out of, and anything like that could be filled with dirt and seeds put in it. And he started a lot of his seeds in those things. You don't have to go out and buy pots. Sir John quickly recognizes their deficient state and sends along a large basketful of garden stuff as a cottage consolation present. Wouldn't that be nice to get a large basketful of garden stuff, or to give somebody a large basketful of garden stuff? Wouldn't that be nice? That's one reason why I like to order Imperfect Foods. And there are other brands, there are other companies that deliver fresh food to your door that you can order, and I really have enjoyed some of the produce. And the recent one that I got, now I do have my own garden, but sometimes it doesn't supply things at the same season, as you can from a grocery store like that. And so my lettuce being gone, I ordered this mixed lettuce it's still growing, in the clamshell container. And it had 4 or 5 kinds growing in there, and I really did enjoy the color and the beauty, and it was just like getting one of these baskets of garden stuff. His soothing symbolic message: life goes on, ladies. Look on the bright side. You still have vegetables to eat. I really took seriously that fresh air lesson from this book the last time I was here. And today was a beautiful day, and I decided I was just going not to come in. So I walked around outside, I hung out the laundry, I brought in the laundry, I walked around, I poked around in the garden, I planted a couple of acorns, I walked around, picked up a couple of leaves, and I tried to stay out as much as I could, because after reading that lesson on the air, where they commented, they just need the air. They just need some air. I started to see things differently, and how they went outside and appreciated a plant or a tree or a bush. I looked at it with new eyes deliberately, instead of you just walk past it and think, oh, that's a tree that's been there for years. But they felt they needed to appreciate it, and so I have been out all day long and kept finding other things to do, and that's why it's so dark here right now. I didn't want to waste any of the sun indoors. So, continuing on, Austen eats garden stuff. You might have noticed the pattern. No sooner do characters visit their rich friends in Austen world than they're immediately whisked outside to admire the kitchen garden. You know, we used to do that in the olden days. When you went to see somebody in the summer, they first wanted to take you out to see their garden, and then they went in and had coffee or tea or pie. Pie was a big deal back in the 1950s. The world was always better if you had pie. I'm sure that pie is getting a big revival now because I have seen so many cooking shows, not shows, but classes that you can take that are so full up, and they're all on pie. And the beauty of pie, see, pie is pretty ancient because you could hold your food in without having a plate because it's wrapped in a crust. That's the beauty of a pie. So they're whisked outside to admire the kitchen garden. Yes, I remember those days. A walled-in lawn of vegetable plots and fruit trees. One's proximity to fresh produce, you see, is quite the legitimate boast in Jane's novels. Mrs. Palmer, in Sense and Sensibility, doesn't begin to do justice to the grandeur of her house until she takes Eleanor and Marianne on an ostentatious tour around the kitchen garden, examining the fruit bloom upon its walls and dawdling through the greenhouse. General Tilney dawdles a bit longer. Eager to show off his solid wealth to Catherine, the unrivaled kitchen garden of Northanger Abbey does the trick. The number of acres outlined within this garden was such as Catherine could not listen to without dismay. The walls seemed countless in number, endless in length. A village of hothouses seemed to arise among them, and a whole parish to be at work within the enclosure. Encouraged by Catherine's looks of surprise, the general casually lets it slip that, should she marry his son Henry, the marriage package will come with excellent kitchen garden of her own. That would be nice, when you think about it. Wouldn't it be nice if someone thought enough of his son and his future daughter-in-law to get a kitchen garden ready for them? In Jane's novels, married bliss doesn't get much better than constant access to fresh produce. Even the Darcy Dreamboat package gets substantially more blissful once Lizzie beholds the beautiful pyramids of grapes, nectarines, and peaches grown fresh in Pemberley's greenhouses. The calculation would have been easy for Austen's original readers to make. Mr. Darcy, a man of fruit and fortune. Yep, Lizzie is going up in the world. Remember, she said, and this was put in the movie, the 1995 movie, I believe. She said, I really didn't know I cared for him till I saw his beautiful place at Pemberley. During good times, fresh produce grew steps from her back door. During bad times, it was much harder to come by. Her childhood and adolescence, undoubtedly the most financially secure periods of her life, came with the luxury of living in a comfy rectory in Hampshire, with 2 walled gardens bursting with fruit and vegetables, but a substantial drop in income and subsequent move to the city center of Bath. I assume this is talking about Persuasion. Made fresh produce scarce for a time. In Bath, Jane bemoaned the fact that one store-bought cucumber in 1801 was just as pricey as a pound of butter. Yet 8 years later, her fortunes changed again. A return to country life, to her final home in Chawton Cottage, clearly came with one major perk for Jane, condensed in her first eager question about the property. What sort of a kitchen garden is there? A rather large one, came the answer, with an orchard, a vegetable patch, hedgerows too. Such a great crop of everything from plums to peas was back on the Austen family table. Everyone equated living well with eating green throughout the era. Enjoyed for their own sake, not just a filler or adjunct to meat, the English loved to get adventurous with their garden stuff, dabbling in growing different varieties of old favorites or trying something totally new. Austen writes about the thrill of using a weird red and rumpy-looking fruit newly imported from the Americas, tomatoes, so new that Jane adorably flounders on the spelling them, called tomatoes, and insists her sister try them too. I remember when my children were teenagers how they became very interested in the produce section of the grocery store when there was something unusual there, fruit or something from that they hadn't seen, something besides oranges, apples, and bananas. They would see something in there, and whereas I would walk past it because, I just grew up with these three main fruits, they would walk past it and look at it and were curious. And so I said, well, put it in the cart. We'll cut it open when we get home. We'll see what it is. So they were allowed to try things like that. In her simpler way, Austen loved keeping up with the Tilneys whenever she could, pottering about in her own kitchen garden at Chawton and getting the agreeable surprise of finding the first summer strawberries in the patch or detecting the first apricot on the trees. I have an apricot tree that has maybe had one apricot on it. It's probably not made for this climate. Today, those who have grown anything remotely edible, even if it's just a pot of parsley on the fire escape, can relate to Austen's agreeable surprises and fuzzy feelings for her little plot of earth. The garden is quite a love, she said. And it's true, a garden is like having someone to look after, somebody else to look. It's just one more thing to look after. It's like a child because you cannot just leave it on its own, or it will either die or just take off and grow out of control and go to seed before you know it. But once this lovely garden stuff got into her kitchen, things started to look a little different from what we might expect today. Austen didn't go wild and crazy with her vegetable cookery. She didn't mold her boiled spinach into the likeness of the Prince Regent, in case you're worried. But there are a few historical differences in how Jane approached the edible English verdure. Like everything else in Austen's kitchen, plants came with distinct dietary rules, ways to enjoy and eat them more healthfully. Nothing wacky, just the Regency take on traditional plant-eating strategies inherited the world over. Some of them you might recognize, and others have been almost forgotten in recent years. But as it happens, they are all of them very clever. Now I am going to let you go so that you can enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll just put this on a playlist and you can run the last two together that are only 30 minutes. And we'll try to speak longer next time. But I did have the ladies' fellowship today and a Bible class, and my voice is not going to hold out much longer. So ladies, and it's getting very dark here. So ladies, I am so pleased to have been able to come. And it's such a privilege. And so you're welcome to leave a comment on the page and just click the link that takes you there, and I will talk to you later. Bye.